My name is Karen Tucker, and I'm CEO of the Churchill Club. Really appreciate you coming out this morning. And our program is called the Women Tech Exec Roundtable 2015. We have with us 5 distinguished individuals to address this topic. Judith Bitterli, CMO of AVG Technologies. Julie Hanna, Executive Chair of the Board, Kiva.org, and just this week, named Presidential Ambassador for Global Entrepreneurship. Congratulations. Amity Millhiser, Managing Partner, PwC, and Tanja Rueckert, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Products and Innovation, SAP, and of course our moderator, Deborah Piscione, who is Principal and Co-founder of Vorto Consulting, and also New York Times best-selling author of Secrets of Silicon Valley and the Risk Factor. Welcome and thank you all very much for being with us this morning. Special thanks also to SAP for hosting this program, particularly Sarah Woodward and Kelly Drenner for generously all of your generosity all the way along here. And I also want to put a special thank you out there to Ms. Betty Taylor for her help. It always takes a village. We couldn't have done it without you, so thank you very much. A few words about the Churchill Club, a nonprofit business and technology forum operating here in the Bay Area. We're in our 30th year now. Our mission is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we convene discussions up to 40 times a year and invite insightful speakers to share their views. We ask our speakers to contribute new thinking to advance collective understanding and not to repeat things that they've said in other settings necessarily, but to build on them. And we tend to focus on the future and where the greatest opportunities lie. So we hope that you in the audience will have new ideas when you leave here this morning. We have an amazing set of programs coming up, and I hope you'll be able to experience them on Thursday, May 21st. It's the 17th annual Top 10 Tech Trends program with 5 of the 100 top venture capitalists in the world who will present trends that they believe will see major growth in 5 years, but that are not obvious today. The CEO and managing editor of Forbes will be our masters of ceremonies for that. And the evening of Tuesday, June 2nd, it's about opportunities represented by wearables with 4 outstanding speakers, including Misfit CEO Sunny Vu and famed industrial designer Yves Bahar. And then finally, the morning of June 9, in Santa Clara, we explore what the successful enterprise will look like on the 5-year horizon, the future high-performance enterprise. And among our speakers is Jonathan Becker, Chief Digital Officer here at SAP. One final was here with us in the audience this morning. One final announcement: if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your program. Now let's turn this over to Deborah to lead our conversation. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you all here so early in the morning on a Friday. So as we know, these are 4 extraordinarily accomplished women. You can read all about their bios in the program, and we will definitely get into the journey of where they've come and gone and continue to navigate. But I think we want to hit it out with a bang here, and I think we want to get the elephant out of the room, and we want to know the ugly truth, the reality of the plight of women, whether it's your own experiences within business. What are you seeing? What still is the big issue that needs to be addressed? And we're just going to take it down the line. So Judith, take it away.
Thank you. The first job that I interviewed for as a VP was with a tech company. And in the interview session, there were 2 questions that were asked of me, which I think kind of typify where we are with diversity in the industry. And the first question was, my husband was an exec in a company at the time, well known. The interviewer said to me, how are you going to be able to fulfill your wifely roles and do this job? And I said to him, would you ask this of a man? He said, no, but you're not a man, you're a woman, and you have a big responsibility for your husband. We got past that, and And then the second question was, he said, why should I give you this job? You're just going to go off and have babies. And I said to him, if your daughter were sitting here, would you want to deny her the opportunity? And he said no. So, these are issues that I feel we still have in the industry. And you look across any meeting that you're in, it's predominantly men, with the exception of 1 or 2 women. So it hasn't changed a lot.
And you still feel like this could potentially happen today?
Yes. I mean, I hear it. I did a talk at South by Southwest on Boardroom or Baby. And in the audience, it was predominantly women between the ages of, I'd say, 22 and 35. And one of the most pervasive questions was, how do I tell my boss I'm pregnant? I don't want to lose my job.
Julie, I'm going to characterize you as the non-corporate, extraordinarily successful woman on the panel here. And what I find fascinating about your career path is you are a serial entrepreneur, but you have not typically done the pink path. And you haven't been involved in retail and those industries, that beauty, fashion that we typically expect women to be in. So what are you seeing? What's the ugly truth from your neck of the woods?
Well, the thing that I reflect on a lot these days is how we can elevate the discourse around the kinds of things that Judy just talked about in a very tangible way, and the gender inequality issues or bias, hidden, unconscious, or conscious, elevate them to be an issue for humanity. So that how do we talk about this in a way that actually is of interest to everyone, in the same way that Martin Luther King elevated the issue around race to be a civil rights issue. How do we get everybody at the table caring about this, caring what happened to Judy is something that both men and women care about. And so that I think it's a very exciting time in my mind, because there is an active conversation where you have everybody is coming to the table. One of the things I'm constantly doing is sampling the men in my life, colleagues, friends, and noticing, are they tuning into this conversation? Are they caring about it? And I've noticed a real sea change shift over the past year, and I've found that fascinating. And so I think one of the healthiest things that's happening now is that we are able to have public conversation about unconscious bias, about hidden bias around some of these things. And even 3-4 years ago, we weren't able to do that. It was something that I know I felt uncomfortable talking about because I didn't know how to talk about it in a way that wasn't polarizing. And so we're finding ways to talk about it that are neutral. How do we talk about this in a way that's kind of neutral, that elevates it, that makes us think about it in the context of our daughters, that makes us think about it in the context of justice as a justice issue, that makes us think about it in the context of impact and effectiveness and success and competitive advantage. How do we think about diversity not as a woman's issue, but think about diversity, why does it matter? Because it's about diversity of thought and experience. And when you broaden it in that spectrum, you say, I'm going to build a company that's going to have a competitive advantage that solves problems, the complex problems that we're dealing with today. If you have a room full of people all with the exact same background, including gender, race, growing up experience, they're going to solve that problem very differently than if you have people with varied backgrounds, including the 2 genders represented. And my money would be on the group of people that have diverse backgrounds to be able to solve those problems and get that advantage. So I think we're starting to understand that in addition to this being a justice issue, it's also an impact and a success issue.
And just for the record, being the entrepreneur that you've been and in venture capital as well, I mean, have you personally experienced that unconscious bias?
I am a geek. I'm a technologist, I'm a geek. I came to the Valley 20-something years ago, and at that time, geeks we're a maker culture, and geeks stare at their shoes. They don't even notice what sex you are. We didn't notice. I didn't notice I was the only woman in the room, and I think the guys hardly noticed too, because we were making stuff. And now, as Silicon Valley has grown, there's been a more diversity of people coming to the Valley. And some of these things are starting to show up. So it's an interesting thing. Now, at the same, I will say, there's a two-edged sword to being gender blind. There's an advantage to it, because sometimes you don't see the barrier and you just plow right through it, and other times you don't see the barrier and you don't know what's holding you back. And I'm sure I had both happen to me. So in hindsight, I think probably where I began to experience it is when I hit the executive ranks, when I became a CEO, when I at the boardroom level, where the dynamic, kind of subtle, things started to happen. I would say something and someone else would say something, the exact same thing, and it would be heard in a different way.
Yeah.
The interrupting thing, women get interrupted 5 times more than men. Now, I also had a very kind of brash, aggressive style as a young woman, and I was a bit of a take-no-prisoners style, so that worked. Now, when you become an executive and you have that, it stops working as well, and you're more offensive, and being more forceful is not as effective if you're a woman, whereas maybe I would see men have that same style. It's fine. They go at each other hard in a boardroom, slap each other on the back, go have a beer afterwards. It's all good. I'm going directly at them in a hard-hitting manner in the same way, and it's received differently. And those are just some objective differences that were limiting for me. Sorry to go on so long.
That's okay. Amity, you spent time in Switzerland, and in fact, your partnership with PwC started there. So were there good, the bad? Where are women at? What are your experiences?
So for me, I just have an inherent fear that each one of us has a story running in our head, and that story running in our head can control our destiny. And my worry is that the story running right now is overwhelmingly statistically negative, and that starts to control what we believe we can achieve as a gender. And I say that as a mom of an almost 16-year-old, right? I want her to start her life professionally with inspirational people around her, encouraging her to lead and succeed. And I'm hoping that through conversations like today, we really start to change the dialogue and the way we talk about it, and looking forward to a very, very different world in her lifetime. And so that's really what I think is the most important thing.
Tanja, you recently come from Germany here at SAP. What's the ugly truth?
So I believe there is some truth, and let me share 2 stories. One actually happened in Germany. I was studying chemistry, and you can imagine I was the only female. And then we went to a large chemical company in Germany, a recruiting event, and we went for lunch. And then I thought, I ask now, do you also employ some females? And the answer was, yes, you see some around. Some waitresses came and brought us some. And for me, one thing was clear: I never worked for this company. And then last week we had a large event, technology, software, big 20,000 people, and bathrooms, right? And sometimes there are queues in front of bathrooms. What is your guess where the queues were? It's a male or it's a female bathroom, or women or men bathroom? It's the first time I've seen this, which was kind of exciting, right? You pass. But it's somehow the truth. While I don't want to paint it so black, because I really believe it's changing. Yeah. It's changing, and I can see it because all of you are here. It's changing. It's not only females sitting in the round. And we discussed it before, we can be the role models or try to be, but we need all of you, men, female, young ones, older ones, to change it. And Silicon Valley is a place to start, because I have never seen a more diverse area in my own experience than Silicon Valley.
Speaking of Silicon Valley, I'm actually an East Coaster who moved out to Silicon Valley a little bit less than 9 years ago. And my experience was I'd never seen more women with such hubris, confidence in the driver's seat. Little tidbit that my book, Secrets of Silicon Valley, was originally during the book proposal process called Women in Silicon Valley Drive Porsches, or Silicon Valley Women Drive Porsches, because it was very much about these women being in the driver's seat. I absolutely attribute it to the culture and the ecosystem that exist here. And I do feel that even for my own self, what I'm doing today, I would never be able to accomplish back on the East Coast. I just got back from New York, Ohio, a few other places I was this week, and was reminded again, there's a vulnerability out there that I don't see necessarily in Silicon Valley. What is your perception of just being in the right culture, in a larger ecosystem? I'm not talking about within your organizations, because we'll get to that. But the fact that we are seeing women advance to places we've never seen before, but it's happening here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's definitely happening here. My perspective is a little bit different. The first 7 years of my career, I was in the United States Army. And I was with the first wave of women that went through airborne school. I was the first female jump master, first master parachutist. If they wanted to see if a woman could do it, I was generally drug out, whatever it was. But you know, diversity was mandated in the military. And the military has a long history of mandating diversity, whether it's based on race or whether it's based on sexual orientation or on gender. So for me, going from the military to tech, it was a little bit of a change, because I was surrounded by men who in the beginning didn't want me, didn't like me, but in the end fully supported me, mentored me, engaged with me. And here, I think we're not at the level that we were when I was in the military. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One, Julie spoke about this, and I think as women and as men in the room, we have an inherent responsibility to educate the men that surround us with why diversity is good, why it's good for the business, why businesses perform better when there's a diverse audience. I think also we have a responsibility as women to vote with our pocketbook, work for companies who promote and support diversity. The only asset we have is our intellectual capital, and we need to start throwing it around. So that's my perspective.
Well, let's talk about men for a second, because I remember moving here, trying to build out my first company, trying to raise capital when I was pregnant. John Doerr of Kleiner Perkins publicly said, when asked, who do you like to fund? And he said, white, male, Harvard School dropouts. That was my introduction to Silicon Valley. A friend of mine later went back to him and said, why did you say that? And his response was, I like to fund people I'm comfortable with. And I thought to myself, well, okay, that's a decent answer. Are we guilty of wanting to associate people who look like us, who talk like us, who are educated like us? Are we guilty of that?
Well, I mean, that is certainly human nature by and large, right? It's why we're tribal, and so we do gravitate towards like. Now, if you look at an ecosystem like Silicon Valley, it's hyper efficient, and the funding process, the venture funding process, you're making high stakes decisions with very little information. It's a very unforgiving process. You're making a snap judgment within an hour whether you're going to have another meeting with that entrepreneur, whether you're going to fund them. And so as analytical as we want to believe we are about analyzing the investment opportunities, you also have to, especially in the early stages, it's 90-something% about the entrepreneur, because the idea can change, the product, the hypothesis can change, everything changes, but it's about the person. So it's 90-something% about the entrepreneur, secondarily about the idea, the viability of the idea, all of that, because that's all theory. And so there's always a gut check. Is this somebody I can back? Is this somebody I can feel comfortable with? Is this somebody I feel comfortable being in the foxhole with when things go sideways? And so that's where these kind of unspoken and even subconscious comfort about, okay, that person looks like somebody I could do that with. I call it, and we do this with boards, right? When you're recruiting for boards, it's who do I know? Who do we know? Because there's a massive risk, and you're looking for trust and credibility. And so you look to your network, you look to who is like you. I call it the lazy man's formula for chemistry, right? It's like, it's much easier to de-risk those things in your mind when you're choosing someone like you. So you have to push yourself out of that. In my own world, I mostly know men because I'm in tech, and so I've had to push myself. I was horrified at one point with my own company, realizing that I had mostly men. And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to get more women in the company? Because all the resumes were men, and I realized I have to do something extraordinary to attract that. Same at the board level. So we do have that bias. And in the funding climate, it's very strong because the conditions are such. So I think we just have to acknowledge that and say it's going to take a conscious effort to break out of that, because the natural gravitational pull is towards like.
Absolutely. And along those lines, Amity, what's men's responsibility? Is the onus on us to raise our voices, to do something, to negotiate better? You were talking about statistics earlier. It perpetuates fear, it perpetuates limitations on what we think we can and can't do. What's women's responsibility and what's men's responsibility in terms of elevating
so there's
women?
no question. I think we as women, really, back to your point, have such an amazing potential impact on society. We have to speak up and be part of that. But we can't do it alone. And I am a huge believer, and we are a huge believer at PwC. We just recently announced that we're a big part of the He for She initiative with the UN. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but it's really about men supporting gender equality as well as women. And I'll tell a story. When I lived in Switzerland, I became our first woman partner there. So I can identify a little bit with the statistics in the Valley, where people look around their organizations and they say, well, there's no women role models for me, how am I going to get ahead? And the reality of that is, if you are in an organization where there aren't female role models and you want to lead, you're going to have to find a way to do that without female role models. You're not going to change that. And I was very, very fortunate to work for amazingly visionary people who really could see the vision of the importance of diversity in their leadership teams. I mean, Switzerland is a place where diversity is enormously important to the consumer culture because it's a small country. So if you run any of the big organizations there, the chances that your consumer are Swiss is actually very, very small. So they deliberately build diverse leadership teams around that. I think the Valley has that similar effect, especially with the consumerization of technology, that it's really important that we have multiple voices in the room, in the boardroom, in the management team. But I think it's going to take all of us coming together. I think it's going to take visionary men, some of whom will have daughters and so will want a different world for their daughters, really being there to sponsor, support, and mentor women so that there are more women in leadership roles. And that sponsorship and that support means more than just saying, I want you in a leadership position. It means giving you tough feedback along the way on how you're going to get there, the skills you need to develop, the things you need to be better at. And it means that women need to be responsive and open to that kind of feedback if they want to get there.
I just want to add to that, the amplifying role models is such a crucial part of this, and it even speaks to this investment bias, because if you look at, we're now getting a generation of successful women entrepreneurs building big companies that are completely out of the model. One of the things Silicon Valley does that's very effective and very efficient is pattern match. So we pattern match on success and all the markers of success and all the profiles of the entrepreneur, and that's why everybody's chasing a 21-year-old boy in a hoodie to invest in, right? Because it's pattern matching. And so when you have someone like the founder of Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, who I just spent the week with, or the Goldilocks founder, or the founder of Stella and Dot, and they had a hard time getting funded early on because they were out of that pattern matching profile.
Yes.
But now there's an alternate model of success that's emerging, which again, if you're a good investor, you chase success and you start to formulate, okay, how do you pattern match around that? It's an alternate model of it, because women like this, entrepreneurs are solving different problems. It's like the founder of Support Pay said, it's like, women are not going to solve there's problems that the 21-year-old boy in the hoodie is interested in solving, and then there's a whole bunch of problems they're not interested in solving that are very important to humanity, whether it's blood testing, whether it's getting girls into science, whether it's what Support Pay does, which is automating child support payments for families. So this is creating an alternate path that we can listen and say, okay, there's success there, and there's a different kind of entrepreneur to be backed.
Absolutely. Tanja, in Silicon Valley, again, as I mentioned earlier, there are women achieving things that no other women have achieved before, but at the same time, there's just as many of highly educated women who have opted out of the workforce. So while this is a women in tech panel, and we know all the statistics and the gender imbalance, We also hear that in lots of other industries. I was just at a bunch of law firms. We hear it in hedge funds, venture capital. You can go on. And even the pink industries like retail, you'll find a lot of men at the helm of executive leadership. So it's a numbers game, right? The fact of the matter is there's just not enough of us. So what do we need to do to either bring these highly educated women back into the workforce? We know we've got to encourage the next generation to go into STEM-related subjects. What's your advice?
And you teed it up well. I'm happy to answer it. Are you okay if I jump first on the question you asked, Julie?
Sure.
But I come back because I will go to school and Stanford and such things, what you highlighted. But I liked this a lot when you said this male and this white male who was asked. And I want to support your answers that we really often hire people who are like us. Yeah? We have to remind us hard that we really look for diverse backgrounds. And you have to go to a colleague sitting next to you and say, please, you are more visionary, hire someone who is in execution. You already have 5 males, get a female. You have no one from a different culture. You have to remind yourself because naturally you're not doing it. And one more advice on that. I had a story where I was asked for a bigger job and it was ours, and then I was proposed, and then our CEO at that point in time said, oh, Tanja, I thought more of a senior white hair male. And I was 10 years younger, I was female, I was for sure not white haired. And I really thought, what should I do? And should I now try to play a role? Should I try to be a little tougher and imitate a senior white-haired man? And I was really unsure. It was not so that I felt. And then I said I try to be myself and fight it through. And I believe that was much better. And this is one advice I would like to give to all of you. And I'm sure. Talking to you earlier, I'm sure it's the same for you. Be always yourself, even if you're not meeting the expectation of a white male or white-haired. Okay, I just wanted to make that comment.
No, very important.
Yes. And the others can join in on the Silicon Valley because I can only add a little bit because we are working very closely with Stanford and trying to get female recruits and showing that innovation is cool, and also all companies, maybe not only Google and Apple are cool, all companies working in technologies are cool. And we have programs with university alliances, what others have as well, working with several universities, trying to attract females and males, and working with schools because we have to start small. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I try to attract her from time to time to the work we are doing. Sometimes it works, sometimes not. And there's so much to do. We also support female startups, which is maybe then the next generation. You start in school, university, and then the entrepreneurs. But maybe here you can also join in Silicon Valley.
So you talked about statistics, and I was at a dinner a couple of weeks ago with sort of the next generation of leaders in the Valley. Amazing, amazing young women who had started phenomenal ventures, and to your point, in very different areas, often solving society's problems, which I think is something that women are very often attracted to. And there were a number of freshmen at Stanford at this dinner, and it's not very often that I get to sit down with people who are studying STEM at Stanford in their first year. And one of these young women had just been to White House and presented technology on some sort of diagnostic about assessing breast cancer earlier on and less invasively than traditional methods. And she sat at dinner and she said to a group of us, so over your career, has the situation for women changed? And what she was referring to was the statistics of percentage of women in STEM and all these things. And it was just astonishing to me to hear that, because here's a person who really has the potential to change the world. And I said to her, you really can't pay attention to that. You have too much to offer to be worried about whether the statistics are getting better. You have to be convinced of the impact that you're having. One of the advantages, certainly when I started out, is that there were no statistics. So probably because they were so poor, nobody was tracking them, but there weren't any, right? So if your family believed in you and your organization believed in you, you just plowed ahead. And to me, there is positive in the statistics in that it helps us to hold ourselves accountable and measure progress, but we can't let it demotivate the very women like this woman who was sitting across from me from early achieving what they really can.
All right, we're going to move to what I call rapid fire, and these are just really quick responses. But I want to know, what do you not like women doing in the workplace?
It drives me nuts when women are catty about other women and not supportive of other women's success. There's, several female CEOs in Silicon Valley, and invariably the office will start talking about that person when they come up in the news, and the women jump right in. For me, that's totally unacceptable. We will never get to where we need to go if we keep belittling each other.
Gosh, you took my answer.
I'm sorry.
It's the infamous quote that we all love from Madeleine Albright: "A special place in hell for women who don't support other women." I think maybe just a slight twist on that troubles me is seeing how pervasive the competitiveness as a form of survival amongst women happens, and the others kind of taking things personally. So, it's not personal, and men are socialized in a way where they can go really hard at issues without experience them as personal. You can get in each other's faces. And I notice when I do that with a woman, it's like she wants to kill me. It's and is never going to speak to me again. It's like it's not personal. So those are two things.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most important pieces of advice I got from a man early on is business is just business. It's nothing personal, and I've always taken that with me. What do you hate when women do in the workforce?
I
Amity?
hate when women apologize for themselves at the start of a conversation, and it happens all the time, right? Either they apologize for themselves or they start by giving everybody else credit rather than taking it themselves. And I think part of it is how we hold ourselves and how we think about ourselves and being comfortable being self-confident.
Tanja?
Try to behave like men. and a second one, in Germany we have a word, it says Zickenkrieg, it's bitch war. And don't write this down. It's really, let's be supportive and not jealous to each other.
And I'm going to flip that because I hate cleavage in the conference room. I think it makes it unbelievably confusing for men when I can't stand it, I don't want to see it, you got to leave your bits elsewhere. But that's my personal. What have we learned? What are starting to do really well now? Not to generalize, but just from your perspective.
Yeah, there's two practical things that I'm seeing. One is, especially with women that I mentor, I talk about the importance of building a plan. They need to build a life plan because invariably they'll probably have children. So they need to plan out where do they want to be in their career, how do they stay relevant, how do they get back into the workplace, but literally putting more effort into planning their career than they do their wedding. And then the second thing is being in the workplace cognizant of creating a good work environment. Don't have meetings at 4 in the afternoon because both the moms and the dads have to go pick up the kids. Don't do meetings at 7 in the morning. They have to get the kids off to school. So really holding ourselves accountable for building a good workplace as well as, planning.
Julie?
Calling stuff out. There's so many things that I work with a lot of women entrepreneurs in the Valley, and I'll get calls that say, this happened to me and is absolutely unacceptable. What do I do about it? Or they call the person on it. And when I first started getting those calls, I would reflect on my own history, and I thought, gosh, 20, 30 years ago when that happened to me, I normalized it. I didn't even notice it. Or if I did notice it, I was timid to call it out because of all of the negative implications of doing that. And so with this generation, the younger generation of women, they're really clear about what is over the line, and they are raising all of our consciousness about it. And I think that's a huge shift.
I think women are doing a great job of building more diverse teams within organizations themselves. And I mean that in every aspect: generational diversity, racial diversity, how you were brought up. I think that we have all recognized that we bring unique value to our organizations and the worlds we in, and I think much more conscious of doing that, and therefore really being role models around us about how that can be done.
Tanja.
I think women are good in aligning people, are good in collaborating and building a team behind one goal. And I think we should build on our strengths. And maybe just as a second one, building a little bit on what you also said, advice is don't work 10 hours, 12 hours and forget building a network and visibility for yourself. Because we tend to do this. We tend to do meetings at 4, we tend to do meetings at 7, and then you look at the watch, it's time to go to bed, and you did not share what good work you have done the whole day.
So I want to go back to, with our remaining time, and talk about something that I find really important. As a side, I started a community called Alley to the Valley, which brought together highly influential women for deal-making, deal flow purposes. And we realized, we threw 25 women from New York and 25 women in Silicon Valley. We threw them in the Rosewood Hotel. We had no idea what was going to come out of it, but we had these partners at venture capital firms and entrepreneurs, and deal flow just started naturally happening. Here's what we realized. Alley to the Valley became a very safe place and a way that women could best get the job done. It became the proverbial golf course. So for me, the only way to change the conversation, because I don't want to hear that I'm the second sex every single day, I herald some of the books that have come out in the last couple years, but again, I'm reminded and slightly demoralized that I'm not as good as a man. So the only way we need to change this conversation is to collaborate, to impact that bottom line, to show that there's enough mass, enough force that we can increase revenue, we can generate new revenue streams. So what is the best way, whether you're a part of a community, whether you have women's leadership programs within your organizations, what is the best way we can get women to collaborate, not have that aspect of jealousy, but that we all gain by helping one another?
Yeah, within the company, we have a very active mentoring program, and it literally, we've looked across the company at how many women and what percentage of women we have at each level, and then creating programs that mentor up, that really focus on giving them the skills, and as Julie and others have said, making sure they understand it's business. You're going to get direct feedback, suck it up, move on. Outside the company, there are things that we can do regardless of our income. Kiva, working with Girls Who Code, working with Technovation, but getting this next generation of women and entrepreneurs who don't have access to the venture funds, but have great ideas that maybe they can grow into wonderful businesses.
But Julie, there really is still this issue of jealousy, and I don't understand it. And again, for me, what was so shocking coming here is, how can I help you was part of the vernacular, and by taking advantage of that help, I'm in the place that I am. So what's with women and this jealousy or this insecurity or this emotion that kind of comes into play?
The best insight I got into this is when I was in my 20s, I read a book called Naomi Wolf's book, The Beauty Myth. Excellent. I think it was her PhD dissertation. And she talked about the historical reasons for why women compete. And it was a survival thing. It's basically that essentially, if you were able to compete successfully, if I could compete successfully against you all, I could marry the man that had the money, and then my survival was assured, and that was really the only way that women could assure their survival. And then what's happened is society over the centuries has continued to evolve to reinforce those same kinds of survival things in our primitive brains, even though consciously our survival no longer depends on that today. So it's a social evolution thing that's very complex. I think in order to dismantle it, and I like the way you talked about different generations, because I think there's things we can do today with our peer generation, there's the next generation, and then there's young girls. In terms of dismantling those images. One of the things that I think that I'm particularly concerned about, back to the things that women do that drives me crazy, is is even not being conscious about how the fashion industry has sexualized women over the past 2 decades. It wasn't always like this, and how that is brought into the workplace. And these subtle things really undermine power when you dress a certain way. Maybe you think you're being fashionable, and I see young women doing this unaware of what they're signaling. So I think just helping educate them, the implications of these small choices made. What are we projecting? What are you signaling when you're in the workplace? Is it more important to be fashionable and hot and trendy, or is this about you're projecting your power and your knowledge and leading with something else? So there's this education, I think, that, and a consciousness raising around these issues that will start to dismantle this sort of competition jealousy. There's also the perception of scarcity, which creates that, right? If I think that there's only 1 or 2 slots for the woman at the table, because I keep hearing the statistics that there's 1 or 2 women, then I'm competing because I want to be the 1 or 2 there. So that's another contributor.
So I'll tell you, I blame the Kardashians for bringing us back, but that's another story. That's a whole other topic. But I want to stay with you, Julie, for a moment, because just this week I had heard that there's this movement to try to get a woman on the $20 bill, and the $20 bill is because we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And so I thought to myself, really, there's no, I mean, it just dawned on me. We had Susan B. Anthony there for a moment on our silver dollar. That went away. But there's a bigger picture here, right? And your role now that President Obama just appointed you to, what is your responsibility to keep women on the forefront?
So, the role as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship is essentially in recognition of the fact that entrepreneurialism is the lifeblood of the American economy, and to the extent that we can export that and democratize entrepreneurship around the world, and to stimulate economic vitality in other parts of the world, you get stability. You just can't have stability, national stability, without economic vitality, and entrepreneurship is a really strong force in that. Now, when you look, it's interesting, you look at Silicon Valley, I think it's less than 5% of women are getting, venture funded. If you look at crowdfunding marketplaces like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, it's slightly north of 50% that are women-funded projects. If you look at Kiva, which is more about global entrepreneurship, women around the world in 86 countries, 75 to 80% of them are women entrepreneurs being funded. It's very interesting. And so one of the things that I decided to focus on over the next year is to commit to driving $100 million in crowdfunded loans to 200,000 women and young entrepreneurs around the world. And so that's a way kind of bringing attention to this issue that we've narrowed our definition of entrepreneurship to be the 21-year-old boy in the hoodie in Silicon Valley, and actually women are the unsung heroes of entrepreneurship the world over. And how do we back them, back their dreams to get that diversity? So that's a little bit about what this is about for me, and a great platform to amplify those things.
But I think, just to add on it, we all can do something here. Our company also works closely with Astia. It's you might know it, it's for female entrepreneurs, and we are hosting them. I often sponsor them. And I think we all here, and also all our companies, can do more and invest in female startups.
And let me just, we'll end here quickly, and then we're going to go to Q&A. I've often heard that some companies have great policies on the books, but then when you start to talk to their women internally, there's a disconnect there. Do we still need women's leadership programs within corporate entities? And if so, what's the greatest thing they could be doing? Just a real quick response, because we do want to go to Q&A.
I believe I don't believe in quota, but I think we need leadership programs. And the one objective should be to market yourself, so that females learn better how to market and promote themselves. And maybe don't take it personal. Sorry.
And I think we want to get to a point, it isn't just for women, it's to promote diverse schools of thought across an organization, whether it's all sorts of diversity, until it becomes part of your culture and organization. And I would say I'm really fortunate to lead a team in the Valley where a third of our senior leaders are women, a third of our national leaders are women. But it has also become an accepted part of our culture rather than a program. And to me, that is really the goal, where it's how everyone thinks every day when they get up.
But Amity, you mentioned earlier that you have a great leader now who's committed, perhaps because this person has a daughter, so that's made a good impact.
We do. We
Yeah.
have a phenomenal CEO who really believes in it, in his heart, as a goal, and he also has daughters. And I have noticed that it's an easier conversation for me to have with my male counterparts who have daughters about the world that they hope to leave for their daughters.
Yeah.
It just brings a personal awareness to it that, unconscious bias aside, people recognize the environment they want their own children to enter into.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And on that note, we're going to open it up to Q&A. I think there's 2 mics that are floating around. So there's a question here.
I see and read in the business literature quite a bit that collaboration is coming up high on the CEO agenda, both inside and out. And I want to just hear from you for a perspective. Do you think women have an advantage in being better collaborators?
In my experience, collaboration is essential because we live in a very diverse world, geographically scattered, many different time zones. So you have to have the skill to collaborate. But it's useless, at least I believe, unless you have the ability to speak up without apologizing and have your point of view and your perspective heard.
If you could stand, if you have a question, that would be...
Yeah. Maybe let me add on it. I believe the leadership style of the future is not directive anymore. It will be more collaborative. And I can say for our companies, the CEO is seeing this. And female clearly have advantage there.
Hi, I'm Mary Yang, and I want to apologize. First of all, thank SAP for hosting us. It's so grand, Pinkberry, right? And apologize, I was in a car accident this morning, so I didn't mean to be late. I went to the alma mater that John Doerr went to as an undergrad, and I just felt this compulsion to defend Ann Doerr. I mean, he may have said that in a public setting. He is a very wisecracking kind of guy. She is the one that funded Khan's Academy and gave Salman Khan $80,000 to live on. She is the one that has also been very active in using the wealth that he has generated to really good purpose. Also, he's actually, he may have said that, but I find that he's very open. So I think it's important in the spirit of not, promoting, maybe a myth, to stick up for my alma mater peers. My actual question is similar to the daughter issue. I'm a Girl Scout troop leader. I used to work across the street at Xerox Park, but I have a plan for my career for the next 5 years that I want to step down from being the executive level. The issue is, once you have those executive level skills, when you step to the side and have maybe a high-end individual contributor role, it's really hard to communicate the bigger picture to people who are very program or process-oriented. So what advice would you have for me as a woman who has a 12-year-old and wants to get her through high school and, having the bigger experience before and being effective maybe in a, a more siloed role?
Do you all understand the question?
I mean, I think as a mother of a 12-year-old daughter, your daughter sees what you role model. And that, I think, is extremely important, that we have a generation of young girls who see a completely different world. And I think, frankly, for me, it's all about the impact that you have directly around you. It can be a giant organization, it can be a few people. But the impact of all of us thinking differently and thinking differently about the potential for diversity, period, whether it's 5 people or 5,000, is enormous.
Anybody else want to weigh in, or we can go to the next question?
So it's interesting. I mean, a lot of you do have kids, and actually it's funny. I struggle with some of the things that the previous question asker stated. I have a lot of mom guilt, honestly. I've had a lot of jobs. I work in tech. I've worked in tech for a long time. I don't want to tell you how old I am. But one of the things that I struggle with, and I think I've found kind of a balance, is how do I like manage the kids and manage my career? And I have to say right now I'm really lucky. I have a job, and a really good one, that lets me work from home a lot. And that lets me like drop the kids at school. It eliminates my commute. I can be really productive, and I think I do a darn good job. But how do you struggle with like being a mom and having all these responsibilities at work? I actually have structured my career so that I can be there for the kids and go to Little League games and go to high schools and watch my daughter cheer and do all these things while still working and making a really good living. But you guys, I can't even envision being like a VP or a CEO, just because then you have this global responsibility, you're on the road a lot. How do you manage that balance between the kids at home and the responsibility to your job? Because I don't do a job halfway, so I'll never take a job that I can't fulfill.
Okay, Tanja?
So I also have 2 kids, 6 and 8, and they are the most important thing in my life. And we are all struggling. I'm not sure if it's different for you, but it's never easy. Yeah? You have no perfect situation. You have no perfect balance. You have to find a balance yourself. How much time do you want to spend with your kids? How much time you want to dedicate to work? This is one thing. The second one is you need a good safety net around you. It could be a husband, it could be a nanny, it could be somebody the kids love. And number 3 is whenever you have time with your kids, spend it with them. Don't look at your cell phone all the time. Take it away for 2 hours and say, this is the time, it's only for my kids, even if they are maybe not even so much appreciating it at that point in time. You think you go home early and then they come back, oh, I want to do this and that. But just really spend quality time with them. They will remember this time. They will maybe less remember that you were away other times. It's just some.
Yeah, it's a conscious decision, right? I used to love to walk the streets of New York. Now it's not so fun anymore. Everybody's looking down, and I was looking at these mothers and these fathers looking down with their kids, and you've got to make that conscious decision to not let technology rule your personal life.
If I can just add
Sure.
one point. Harvard Business School published a study last year of the graduates of the last 30 years, and one of the data points that stuck out to me was that 80% of the men who graduated expected their wives to have primary care of the children. And guess what? 80% of the women did. So this is tough, but I think women need to have a conversation with their spouse, with their partner, around shared responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And if they're not stepping up, they've got to step up. It is shared. My husband and I, early in our marriage, the first 3 months in, I would go to work, very hard work, come home, cook, clean, do laundry, and after 3 months, I just started sobbing, and I'm not an emotional person. And he said, what's wrong with you? And I said, I can't do this. And he said, do what? And I explained, and he said, well, who asked you to? So I think also, I think the guilt is going to be there, but I think having those conversations with the partners, the honest conversations, is absolutely crucial to sanity.
I don't know about you all, but I'm very eager to hear this gentleman's question.
Yes.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Balint Vojnic. I'm from Hungary, Budapest, which is very much in the center of Europe.
Yes.
I'm attending on the LVTP program, so I'm here. And then my question to you is that you don't feel that actually the power is in your hand and you lead the world, and we, the men, we just should be educated how to handle it, because to be honest, we cannot survive without you guys. And I mean, if you see the flow of the money as well, if we talk about business, is also led by you, and there are so much things. And I think it's just a matter of the way, if you in your micro circumstances, you can be able to educate the man world how to handle you, because when you are a kid, the king cannot be a princess, but you can crown the king. So let the king be the king, but the power is in the hand of the princess. You will never change it, because this is how the world. You don't want to be a king, but a powerful princess.
So are you saying that men are just stupid and they need to be educated? Is that what you're suggesting here?
No, I said that the king is on the surface. You need a king to crown, but without a princess, the king is nobody. That's right.
Very true. Absolutely. Anybody want to comment to that?
Yeah, I don't agree with the king comment. I want to be king. You know?
All right, so this is a comment to the prior conversation about trying to balance motherhood and work. And this is an anecdote that I've shared with several people, and they said they found it really helpful, and they actually called me back and said, you know, wow, I thought of what you told me, so I want to share it with everyone, and hopefully it's helpful. So last summer, a friend of my brother's was training for an Ironman, and he was in the Bay Area doing a half Ironman. And so he invited me to have dinner with his friends that he was doing it with. So they were SVPs, 2 were VCs, they were training for an Ironman. And they were talking at dinner about how they were coaching their kids' soccer teams and baseball teams, and they were not apologetic. And they weren't. They had no guilt. They had, you know, nothing. And I asked them, I said, how are you training for an Ironman? I mean, that's a full marathon, 110-mile bike. And they're like, oh, I do a 2-hour swim at lunch. And I said, well, how are you balancing work? And they're like, yeah, I work at night. It's fine. And, you know, we all know when we pick our kids up or leave early that we get on email later at night. And so just don't be apologetic, because your male counterparts really aren't. So, and I think when you apologize about leaving early, it really shines the fact that you're trying to achieve this balance, and you don't need to shine a light on it. So.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a question here, and then you wanted to ask a question, and then we've got oh, but there's one more man back there. Oh, I'm getting a bunch of
I guess I'll jump in here.
Yeah, if we can do this really quick.
Yeah. How do you manage the stress of the ongoing jealousy and cattiness of other women?
Can you repeat?
How do you manage it? The cattiness, the stress, the ongoing stress of working with other women.
Just don't work with them.
There you go. Okay.
No.
It's true, right? Right?
No, I have to confess, I didn't notice that I had not worked with women for probably the first half of my career because of being in technology and deep tech. And I found that when I was in the rare circumstance where I was with a group of women, I became really afraid. And I felt intimidated. And I realized, because my only reference points were back to high school mean girl experiences, because I hadn't had experiences in adulthood of working with women. And so there is a different dynamic. And for me, what has happened is it has helped me understand that there's a different way to interact with and work with women. And I had not developed those skills. And it was just kind of forced me to diversify my own skills. And in a way, it's made me empathetic to what men go through and having to kind of change their style in working with women. And you know, I was sort of being flippant about the don't work with them, but when I see that, when women behave this way, part of it is like there's something that's crying out to be recognized or to be supported. It's fear. It's a fear-based behavior. Sometimes what works is actually trying to create a sense of acknowledgement and giving the person kind of the space to feel like they're recognized and they're valued. Because what we behave bad and well, mostly what we want to know is that we're valued and recognized for what we uniquely bring to the table. And so sometimes even just responding to that cattiness with an acknowledgement and appreciation of who this person is, what they're bringing to the table, can really kind of neutralize it. Not always, but sometimes I think that's what's going on.
And I think what is often helpful is convince her that you can help her to reach her goal, and then jointly move forward.
All right, we're going to try to take 3 really quick questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a recent transplant here to Silicon Valley from the East Coast. And coming here as an executive, I have found, again, I haven't been here that long, but it's been my experience there are even fewer women in the boardroom and in the executive positions here than back east. And I know that you all have probably recently seen all of the data from the tech companies in terms of diversity, in terms of minorities, especially African American and Latino women. So I was wondering, we had several, I've had several ways in which to try to really get at this in ways that are not controversial or
So is your question, how do we better achieve?
So the question is, yeah, so I mean, one of the simple things is that you require of your company a diverse pool when you're hiring positions, just a simple requirement. So the question is, what are some of the some of the ways in which you have led in your organizations to make sure that women are across the board are really looked at for executive level positions?
So I think we've talked a lot as a panel about the concept of mentorship, which I think is important in sponsorship, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that the main thing we need to do is make sure that the women who are working with us are getting the skills necessary to succeed. It is a skills and an experience-based market like no tomorrow. So I'll take from my own experience, we need to encourage the women around us to take risks. I don't mean crazy risks with their career, but I mean, I lived abroad for almost 20 years, and this is actually one of the more international panels I've been on. Encouraging women to take risks, whether it's starting their own businesses, living abroad, doing things to further their experience levels so that they actually have the skills and experience when it comes for that opportunity to step up and really do a great job.
Or
I think
competitive advantage, right?
I think that's really important.
I think
an easy fix is often included in your HR process. Yeah. So succession management, you need to have a diverse candidate. Recruiting, you need to have a diverse candidate. Talent management, look for diversity.
Judith, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. Talk to HR. Make sure we always hire the best person, but make sure the candidate pool is diverse, and maybe even suggest that the names be taken off the resumes, so there's no gender diversity indication of that person.
We have time for just 2 more questions. I think there was a man in the back, so you'll be our last question. And yes.
I'll be really quick. My name is Amity. I work for HP. And I would like to ask you is who should I contact to understand what kind of program for women development in HP or maybe other organization? I know we have one for the senior management if you are a certain executive level, but the program is not very well known, at least unless you are really a manager or senior managers. So, but how about other people, like not in that ranking? How can we, find out what's the women development program?
So is your question, how can you find out about executive opportunities? Am I understanding this correctly?
I think mainly to develop women. There are many women in HP, then how can we help them to develop? Today, I believe there are some of the women program that is mainly, you have to have a certain ranking or to be eligible or being even approached. So the program is not known.
Mentorship?
I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I think in seeking to do things that acknowledge the unique experience of women in terms of developing them, we should be very careful not to ghettoize the issue of women. And so I'm always a little bit cautious about the idea of putting groups of women together, because why isn't it just leadership development? Because when you have women and men in leadership development together, they learn a lot. They're going to learn a much more diverse set of things than if you kind of risk ghettoizing the problem by isolating them. So there's this balance of acknowledging the unique experience of women and addressing the things that are unique to women, and then also a unifying thing. Because I think what we're trying to get to is a more humanistic way of leading. We want men are getting there, and women are getting there. And women are getting there by not emulating men, but finding their authentic voice. But the only way we're going to get to a unified humanistic way of leading is by doing this together rather than isolating in groups.
And then our final question in the way back of the room.
Don Cameron, I'm an entrepreneur from Norway. I put it to a friend, like when a company starts with a very male-heavy group, how do we preserve gender diversity as we hope to scale? And her suggestion was that the first woman you hire should not be to a traditional administrative or HR role, and the first administrative or HR role should not be a woman. What are your thoughts on that?
Before you answer that question, I just want to point out the two men that answered these questions are from overseas, Norway and Hungary. So take it away.
I think just in general, when we look at statistics, coming back to your point, and when I look at our own company, we have the highest female ratio in HR, in marketing, in communications. Not in development and not in sales, which are our core business areas. And I believe we need them everywhere. So, and I also believe what Julie said before, you need the combination of men and women. So I think it's good to, on purpose, say we are maybe not hiring someone in HR or in marketing or in communications, if I understood your question right.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think the challenge in all the teams as an organization, it isn't just a male-female issue, is how do you create enough diversity of perspective that function operates to its highest potential.
That's right.
And that, I mean, we are blessed in the Valley with an amazing amount of examples of diversity. So we don't even have the issue of attracting diversity into the Valley because it exists here. It's making sure that in our organization and the groups we lead, it's really represented.
All right, one last final question. The last word. Okay, we're going to get our mic. Next, I'm going to the
Just a very quick question. I'd like to get your opinion on companies that are injecting quotas for women. And the reason why is I think it has a negative effect. In Austria, my son came home and his friend, male, was working in an auto industry who's just injected, no, you cannot move forward because we now need to hire a woman in that. And he looked at me and said, what do you think? So I'd just like to get your view on these imposed quotas.
Yeah. So maybe let me start. You mentioned Austria. In Germany, you know, it's also for supervisory boards, there's now a quota for female. I personally do not believe in quota because I think what changes the situation is if the mindset changes, right? It's not if you have a number you have to hunt because then you might hire someone who is maybe not as good as the other ones. And Judith said it before, you should always look at diverse candidate but hire the one who is highest qualified. Do I also have by now doubts that we make it? This is one concern I have, but I still have hope that with sessions like this and other programs, we can change the mindset and reach the goal without having a quota. Maybe in 5 years I talk differently, I don't know. So
I think
you get the last word.
Okay, am I?
Yeah.
Well, I've talked too much already, but the quota thing is interesting because quotas, mandatory quotas are effective when you need to jolt a system that's stuck. And with a finite period of time, it can have the intended effect. There's always the backlash, but that when you kind of want to galvanize energy and attention. When Norway said they had the mandate around women on boards of directors, they were the first to do this, and that caused a ripple effect to Europe, and then it's kind of making its way in the U.S. So that was like this bold statement. I lived in the South in the 70s and 80s when corporations had a mandate, a quota, around racial diversity. And Bell South, where I worked, almost single-handedly created a middle class of African Americans in that part of the country because of this bold stance. Now it has its issues and complexities, and if it's indefinite, it doesn't work. But I think maybe something more effective is intention rather than quota. Making it an intention to have a diverse board, making it a conscious intention, and then measuring what are we doing around that intention. Maybe just a more relaxed approach that doesn't make people like they're handcuffed to a number.
Judith, Julie, Amity, Tanja, thank you for your tremendous insights this morning.
I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your candor, for your generosity. As a small token of appreciation for you, we have the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt.
I have a few of these.
Please wear that in good health. On the theme of intention, I hope that all of you in this room take as your personal intention to continue this dialogue with you in the room this morning, in your own environments. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks again to SAP. See you next time. Have a good day.